Who's not coming down the track? Who's not coming down the track? And the Nemo Street is red and white. Nemo Street is red and white. Ain't nothing finer in the rain. Ain't nothing finer in the rain. When the drunk are marching straight to bed. Come on, come on.
What's up, y'all? This is John back for another episode of the Nothing Finer podcast. I am joined by Henry Green. Say it for me again. I'm so sorry.
Greenstein, you're all
Stein,
good.
of the Lawrence Journal World to talk to us about the Kansas Jayhawks. Mike is not able to join me as he normally would for this one, but we're gonna roll right into it. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Despite some truly oppressive weather here in Lawrence right now, we are just in the single worst part of the summer for Midwestern weather. But the skies are figuratively clearing and literally clearing because football fall camp starts here at KU on Thursday, and there will be things to write about and column inches in newspapers, and that's a very fun time of year for me. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, no, it's we're all super excited, and as you talk about whether it starts storming outside, um, I I live in Savannah, right on the coast, so it's if the power goes out, I apologize. It just kind of when you have 300-year-old oak trees covering your power lines, it just kind of is one of those things.
Yeah,
Um,
I've never had the pleasure of going to Savannah. My dad's family is from Atlanta. I will warn you, it is a tech family, but yeah, I've never made it out to Savannah.
it's it's a lovely place, except for in the summer. I will say today, heat index was 112. And
Oh,
then about the time you get home from work, it starts storming. And that's just every day in July and August.
oh my God.
Could be worse though. I hate the cold. It has snowed here once in the 4 years that I've lived here. I will take that.
Yeah, it took me a long time to get to used to that as well. I'm originally from LA, and we were just absolutely besieged by winter storms here in Kansas last January. So can one snow in a few years, that's pretty good.
So we're gonna jump right into it. Got to get some negative stuff out of the way. Going back to 2024, Kansas finished 5-7, 4-5 in the Big 12. At one point in the season, they lost 6 to 7 games, including a 5-game losing streak. While there were some bad losses, Kansas did play spoiler for most of the Big 12 in the last month of the season. I'm sure most college football fans were very happy to see Colorado not win that football game. And, you know, it might put a lot of Colorado trash talk in here that we're just going to bypass. But offensively, Kansas was averaging 29.7 points per game, seventh in the Big 12. Um, Oddly enough, the most efficient team on third down and fourth most efficient on fourth down. Uh, and I think a big part of that is I mean, was Jalen Daniels playing at 100% for any of the 2024 season?
Well, it's so interesting. First of all, the season was just interesting on a broad scale because Kansas football has not had expectations for 15 years. So this is arguably the first year where Kansas football has fallen short of expectations since like 2009. So the entire climate surrounding that was really interesting. But with regard to Jalen, I think he was healthy, and of course, so he had a recurring back tightness problem that cost him most of 2023. He only played 3 games that year, and I think he was healthy headed in 2024. But the problem is the coaching staff brought him back into action really slowly. Like he didn't get a sufficient number of off-season reps, and a lot of this is stuff they've discussed this year, just kind of looking back retrospectively on what happened. And so even though the receiving core was largely composed of guys he had spent his entire career with, I mean, Luke Grimm, Lawrence Arnold, and Quentin Skinner were KU's top 3 receivers for years. even though that was the case, he was out of sync with them. And it didn't help also, Arnold sustains an injury right at the start of spring practice, spends it in a boot, re-aggravates it at the end of July by stepping on a catfish barb, and then he wasn't like available for a lot of the fall camp as well. Skinner was hurt for part of the summer as well. So everyone was out of sync, and that's at a time where they had a new offensive coordinator as well. So I don't know that Jalen's health during the season was the issue so much as Jalen's rhythm during the season. But it took until about the Arizona State game for him to start looking like the player who was once named the Big 12's preseason offensive player of the year, and drew all those headlines in 2022 when KU started out the season unbeaten. And we've had to have another offseason of Jalen Daniels' health discussion because he was really limited in spring because he had an off-season medical procedure on his knee. And I think Jalen and Lance Leipold and just about everyone here is sick of talking about his health. But this time around, he's been taking steps to work with his new receivers over the summer. He brought them all out to LA to work out over the 4th of July. And he shouldn't be restricted at all in fall camp. So there's encouraging signs that aspect of last year, which was one of quite a few aspects as to why last year went wrong, but that aspect doesn't seem like it's going to recur this season.
So one of the big reasons that Kansas did well last season, Devin Neal, he's sadly gone. He won me half of my college fantasy games last season.
I don't doubt it.
big Devin Neal fan. But who is set up to attempt to replace him this year? Because I feel like he's one of those guys that it's almost impossible for an individual to replace.
I agree. And that tends to be the case when you got the all-time leading rusher in a program history leaving. But Daniel Highshaw has just had a really interesting career arc. He actually got to KU before Devin Neal and is now going to continue on after his departure. He's a hard-nosed, bruising runner. He's had many highlights over the years, just completely trucking people. Most famously, he had a touchdown in 2022 against Duke where he bounced off like 4 tacklers, and that was one of the defining moments of that season and maybe the Lance Leipold era more broadly. But he's also dealt with injury at various points. He's had a couple of fluky injuries that have cost him like the better part of 2 seasons. And then last year he had injury, illness, and then a family matter that caused him to miss the last couple games. So he only played 8 games last year. But he's healthy. He's lost weight. According to his coaches, he's in the best headspace of his career, which seems significant. And he's become more of a leader on this year's team. I think Highshaw is really well positioned to have a breakout season. The question for me is, can he carry the load? I mean, Devin Neal's carry numbers were incredibly high, even though they had Highshaw as a complementary option. Highshaw's never had a season quite like that. The good news is they don't need to be entirely dependent on him because they also brought in Leshawn Williams, who was a transfer from Iowa. And he ran for 821 yards in the 2023 season. Only 1 touchdown, which gives you an idea of what Iowa's offense was like that year.
I mean, that might have been their 1 touchdown for the whole season.
I mean, it's just crazy to think that you can run the length of the football field 8 times and only score once. But the next year, last season, he dealt with injury, and then, of course, Caleb Johnson had a breakout year for Iowa, so he was kind of put on the back burner, ends up transferring. KU flipped him from an initial commitment to Memphis. He's kind of been described as a Daniel 2.0 by the running backs coach, Jonathan Wallace. So they have similar bruising styles. Violent is what Wallace called them. So that should be a good duo, not necessarily like a thunder and lightning thing. It's kind of thunder and thunder. So we'll see how that works. There are some younger running backs further down the depth chart who might get mixed in because they have more contrasting styles, like Johnny Thompson, a redshirt sophomore from LA, who's more of an elusive guy but hasn't really seen any significant action at this point in his career. But number 1A Highshaw, 1B Williams in terms of replacing Neal.
And so how much will the offense miss Devin Neal going into next season? And will Jalen's rhythm be able to take up some of that slack? That's what I was looking for.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, they have another new offensive coordinator. This time it's Jim Zabrowski, who was the quarterback's coach and has been with Leipold for many, many, many years. He has a great relationship with Leipold. One thing I think we'll see is just passing the ball more overall than they did in years past, especially passing it over the middle, which they were kind of seemingly afraid to do for a lot of the year with Jeff Grimes. And I think that there may be an increased reliance on the pass offense that somewhat diminishes the loss of Neal. You know, one thing that KU's been really good at under Leipold is playing to its personnel, and I think they'll acknowledge they don't have a guy that can give the ball 32 times or whatever like they did in that Colorado game. So I think we'll see the offensive strategy adjust somewhat and take more shots and be a little less reliant on the run game. I mean, you mentioned how good they were on third down. A lot of that was handing the ball off on third and long. You know, Sonny Dykes remarked last year ahead of that game that he had never seen someone run the ball on third and long as much as Jeff Grimes does. And it worked, but it worked in part because they had Devin Neal as the one doing it. So I don't know that we'll see that as much this year. But I don't know if that particular aspect is what necessarily concerns me about the offense. I think my biggest concerns on offense are actually at offensive line, tight end, and wide receiver. Quarterback and running back, you probably feel pretty good about at this point in the offseason.
So what are your concerns about the offensive line there?
Yeah, so the offensive line is probably one of the more suspect position groups, and it's interesting because it also has one of the team's best players, if not its best player, in Bryce Foster, the center, who transferred from Texas A&M last summer. This was kind of his first full off season. He got the chance to compete in track and field. He was a national qualifier in the shot put. He's an immensely talented athlete in unique ways because he has this two-sport prowess. And he too became more of a leader this offseason. However, we found out at Big 12 Media Days that he had a minor cleanup surgery of his own, but it's not expected to keep him out any longer than like the second week of fall camp. The question then becomes, though, because he and right guard Kobe Baines are the only two returning starters. So that's the first 2 weeks of fall camp. You're going to have one returning starter on the offensive line. That could be challenging, especially with what we've talked about with Jalen having to get reacclimated. The other thing is that like some of there's position battles raging at two of those spots. So it'll be Foster and Baines, center and right guard, and Calvin Clemens, who is a local kid from here in Lawrence, who's seen kind of spot action and really impressed over the last 2 years, is the present and future left tackle. So he's pretty stuck in there. The questions are left guard and right tackle. And in both cases, it's a transfer versus a long-time reserve for the spot. At left guard, it'll be James Livingston, who really hasn't played much, against Tavake Tuikolovatu, who's a transfer from UCLA. And at right tackle, it'll be Nolan Gorsica, who's been kind of an off-season standout as a reserve, but still hasn't really parlayed that into an actual role, versus Enrique Cruz, who they just brought in the summer. So Tuikolovatu missed a lot of the spring because he was hurt, and Cruz wasn't here in the spring at all. So it's going to be very interesting to see how quickly those two can get acclimated and if they can earn the starting spots. But all of this uncertainty is just a negative when you have a quarterback who you need to keep on his feet and a running back who's stepping into a high leverage role for the first time.
And then pass catchers. You mentioned that you had some concerns about those guys going into the season. Who are you most excited about out of the pass catcher room?
Yeah, I think excitement is honestly the prevailing emotion, especially with wide receiver. I shouldn't have grouped it together with the offensive line because here it's just full of potential. So all those guys I mentioned before are gone. And they brought in an entirely new class. They have 5 transfer wide receivers. 3 came in the spring. An additional one committed in the spring and came in during the summer. And then they just got a 5th using the designated student athlete portal window. The most exciting player of all, and potentially like the highest upside player on the entire offense, is Emmanuel Henderson Jr., who you actually may be familiar with because he was at Alabama. He had a big catch in a game against Georgia, but that was only one of like 5 catches in his career. But they're really, really excited about him. He has a level of speed that KU really hasn't seen from any of its past receivers. He was a 5-star running back. He was the number 2 running back in the country out of high school. Yeah, it's remarkable. These players do not come through KU usually, and got converted to wide receiver. But there was a coaching change at Alabama, of course, kind of fell out of favor. Was like the number 4 or 5 receiver last year, behind some of the best receivers in the country. So now he comes to KU, and it seems like he's the favorite to be Daniel's #1 target this year. Besides him, there's Cam Pickett, a transfer from Ball State, who's expected to be in the slot and make some people miss. I think this will be a big yards after the catch group, which is something that Terry Samuel, the receivers coach, has tried to instill in his players, but hasn't always really come across in games. So there's that. And then some competition at other spots. Levi Wentz is a transfer from Albany. And Bryson Canty was an all Ivy League player at Columbia, but he didn't come in until the summer because you want to graduate from Columbia when you go to Columbia.
Fair.
And then the other one I mentioned was Jaden Doss. I think just because of how late he's coming in and how young he is from Nebraska, I don't expect him to play as big of a role. But those first 4 I mentioned, like those could be Daniel's top 4 targets this year, and they're all new. So there's room for plenty of excitement, especially around Henderson. And I'm really interested to see how it goes, because one thing that there was a 1-week period where it wasn't clear if Jalen Daniels was going to come back for a 6th season. And one thing people were thinking about during that 1-week period is like, man, everyone who was part of this rebuilding project with him essentially is now gone. But now, like, the passing game is his own and Jim Zebrowski's own. And it'll just be really interesting to see how he gels with this new group of wideouts.
So, moving over to the defensive side of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little bit of a struggle last year, especially, front seven. So how do they improve for the 2025 season?
Well, first of all, the linebacker group was totally overhauled in a way it had never been under Leipold. They brought in 3 transfers, including the first transfer to commit to anyone in the 2025 cycle, Bengali Kamara from South Carolina, previously at Pitt. And he's kind of like a plug-and-play starter on the weak side. And then at middle linebacker, they have Trey Lathan, who comes in from West Virginia, and Joseph Sipp Jr. from Bowling Green. There is some level of uncertainty here because they have a new defensive coordinator, DK McDonald, who is actually a first-time defensive coordinator. He previously was a defensive backs coach at Iowa State under Matt Campbell, and then worked for the Philadelphia Eagles before coming to KU. Last season was his first on staff when he was the cornerbacks coach, and then he got promoted after the retirement of Brian Borland, who had basically been on the sideline with Leipold since Leipold first started as a head coach. So there's uncertainty about what a DK McDonald coached defense looks like. Like, we think KU will still be playing a 4-man front. That's how they've recruited. But behind that, it's not necessarily clear, like, will we see more 4-2-5 looks? Probably. That's what it sounded like. They've always had 2 linebackers and then a third kind of hybrid guy. Well, now it seems like the hybrid guy might be less of a linebacker and more of a defensive back. But again, this is all speculation. We won't even see it until the season begins. They've been very, very coy about how they're going to line up in these ways. And we won't see it until the season begins. We may not even see it until they play Mizzou. Like, they may not even, like, show too much of what their actual scheme is going to be until the 3rd game of the season. So everything I say about the defense needs to have that disclaimer in front of it. But, as I said, linebacker group overhauled. They struggled to generate pressure with the defensive line last year until Dean Miller, their weak side defensive end, kind of caught fire the second half of the year, ended up being a second-team All-League pick. He's a really interesting story. He was a JUCO transfer from College of the Canyons who essentially just played special teams for basically the first 2 years he was at KU because he didn't have the frame for it. Like, he could not put on sufficient weight to get actual playing time on the defensive line. But it just clicked for him. Prior to 2024, he immediately became a starter. And, I mean, he has pretty incredible quick twitch athleticism and a great motor. And this is the first time under Leipold that they've had the same pass rush defensive end 2 years in a row because they kept leaving for the NFL, like Lonnie Phelps, Austin Booker. So I think Dean Miller, a second full year as a starter could be good for him. The defensive tackles could be the strength of the entire team because they're one of the few that didn't have significant attrition after last year. And then on the strong side defensive end, they brought in Justice Finkley from Texas and Alex Bray from Illinois. Those are both big physical guys. who I think could be an upgrade over what they previously had at that position. So actually this year, the front seven is probably going to be better than the defensive back group, which has not been the case for many years because I feel like if people knew something about KU football, like on a national level, they knew Jalen Daniels, Devin Neal, and then Kobe Bryant and Mello Dotson. with Kobe
Right.
Bryant and Mello Dotson gone, there is a lot of uncertainty about who actually is going to defend against the pass this year.
So leading right into the next question, what are you expecting to see out of the secondary with replacing a few of the key guys there?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, a lot of it depends on what the five is in a 4-2-5. Like that role will have something to say about exactly what it is. But there's a lot of options, but some players who have not played significant time for KU are going to have to step up. One guy who's pretty much a shoe-in to play extensively is DJ Graham II. He started his career at Oklahoma and then transferred to Utah State before he joined KU this offseason. He's a veteran. He's been in the Big 12. He understands how it goes. He's pretty much locked into a starting outside corner spot. The other one is kind of the complete opposite. It's Jalen Todd, who is going to be a true sophomore, and he's currently the favorite to also start. He was one of a precious few freshmen in the entire Leipold era to actually play significantly. He did really well once he started playing more as a nickel corner toward the end of last season. And I think in that process showed that he was worthy of contending for a more significant role this time around. I mean, he's a great athlete. He's bulked up considerably. Comes out of the Detroit area. I think we'll see a lot of Jalen Todd this year. Beyond that is where it gets kind of sketchy. They brought in Saeed Gibbs, who was at Georgia Tech last season and previously at Rhode Island in the summer, primarily because they liked that he had experience playing nickel. That leads me to believe he'd probably be the nickel back. But there's a couple of younger guys like Austin Alexander and Jaleel Hurley, who's another Alabama transfer, who might be sort of in the mix. But a lot of these players really have to prove it on the field and have not done so for extended stretches. DJ Graham, he was on some pretty bad Oklahoma defenses during his time there. And he's like the most experienced and proven guy in the secondary. It's not too different at safety, honestly, but there are some more sure things. It feels like Taylor Davis was one of the best positive surprises of last season for Kansas. He was a redshirt freshman. He was thrust into action because KU basically had three safeties get injured in Devin and Jalen Dye, who are brothers, and Mason Ellis. With them all out, Davis, who was way down the depth chart, had to basically be a starting safety for the second half of the season, and he did not look out of place for even a moment. I think it surprised basically everyone. But suddenly now he's like one of the best returning players in the defense. And then besides him, there's those three guys who got injured, as well as Oklahoma State transfer Lyric Rawls, who I think has a chance to be a leader on the defense as well. But I mean, like I said, anytime the majority of your lineup was injured last season at a given position, there's going to be question marks. And I just feel like question marks kind of define the cornerback and safety positions for KU this year.
So, with the defensive coordinator DK McDonald, I know you've already said you don't exactly know what formations he's gonna line up in, but is there anything that you hope he brings to Kansas from his time in Philadelphia?
That's a really good question. I think, this is something I've talked to some of my fellow reporters about, and they've mentioned as an idea, is more targeted substitutions, more situational substitutions. That's something kind of associated with the NFL. It sort of feels like in the past, KU has just gone, okay, we're going to have the top defensive ends for this period, and then we'll have the number two, and then we'll have the number three. Maybe having more people who are better tailored to a pass rush situation could help you get off the field on third down. That could be a good thing for McDonald to look into. One thing that he has really emphasized is simplicity. I never felt like KU's defense was too complex under Brian Borland, and maybe this goes along with switching the formation somewhat, but that has been the defining word for KU's defense, since McDonald took over, is just making it so the defenders don't have to think as much and can focus on executing their assignment with the maximum level of ferocity. That's been kind of the main thing he's preaching. I mean, sign me up. That sounds good. Um, Otherwise, I don't know. Yeah, I just feel like tailoring things to more individualized skill sets. They have some unique players on defense. Kind of goes along with what I said earlier about tailored substitutions. But like Alex Bray is a 6'4", 270-pound defensive end. There aren't a lot of those. It could be interesting to see what happens if he plays inside at all, which he did sometimes at Illinois, I believe. Or like John Kamara, who's a linebacker, a young redshirt freshman from Arizona. He was a cornerback at one point during his high school career who has bulked up to become a linebacker, but is still like one of the fastest guys in the team. I think they could do some really creative things with him. So it'll be interesting to see how he chooses to use some of the more idiosyncratic personnel that he has at his disposal.
So moving on into a little bit of the not on the field stuff, but still definitely related to Kansas. We haven't really had very many guests around the Big 12, so just a couple of general questions. But first, KU Stadium's gotten an upgrade. Have you been able to see it?
Well, I drive by it all the time. I unfortunately missed the one time they did a tour of the inside of the stadium, but there'll be more of that to come in the next month before it opens on the 23rd of August. Um, it's a massive upgrade, of course. It puts them with the caveat that only 70% of the stadium has actually changed. That is one thing that I think people will be taken aback by somewhat. On a national level, I'm sure people in Lawrence are sick of hearing about this, but phase one of the project, which is what is about to be completed, only encompasses like the north and west portions of the stadium. The athletic director Travis Goff says it's basically 70% of the stadium, but like people will see on TV that this much of it is new, and then the east stands look exactly like they did before. So it's kind
Are
of
those at least the visitor stands?
I don't know that it's quite divided like that.
Okay.
I don't think that's how it works out. So as Goff put it recently, like it's an eyesore. Like every time they see it, it reminds them they have to get phase two done. And the idea is that after this season, they'll start phase two. So that's the caveat here: is only like three-quarters of the stadium is brand new and shiny and exciting. But it is indeed brand new and shiny and exciting. I mean, they've got a fresh conference center. They've got exhibits about the history of the program. They've got enhanced food options. They've got more bathrooms. The bathrooms were a big point that people were annoyed about in the in the last iteration of the stadium. So I'm really excited to see how it goes on game days. I think that it's a great tangible way of measuring, not only measuring the progress of the program, but cementing it so that KU doesn't regress. And
Right.
that also like has to do with the fact that it wasn't just the stadium; it was also the team facilities and the weight room and locker room and whatnot that were involved in this renovation. So yeah, it's both a monument to what they've accomplished so far and like a way of ensuring they can continue to grow in the future. I think it's a great project, and I'm looking forward to it.
So with media availability, I know in the SEC this time of year, especially fall camp, the reporters that are local to the area, they're lucky to get 10 minutes. Is that the same with Kansas, or do you guys have a little bit more freedom to see practice before the season starts?
I think KU is better than the SEC for sure in terms of the segments of practice that we usually get to watch are about 25 minutes,
Okay.
which I mean that's more than double what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, we see about five periods at the start of practice, um, and then later in each day we get to talk to the position coach and players from a given position. I think KU does a good job with fall camp. I mean, you mentioned the SEC, like famously, it's been near impossible for reporters at some schools to have any sense of what's going on during
Oh
fall
yeah,
camp.
for sure.
Yeah, so the way they do it here is quite nice.
Um, you've mentioned it a little bit. Week three, one of the most underrated rivalries in college football is coming back. Can you explain why more people should care and how excited are the fans around Kansas?
Well, first of all, one reason why people should care is how great these games were in 2007 and 2008 when both
Yes.
programs were competent. I don't know if people remember the Todd Reesing era of KU football, but like that was me growing up and like thinking that KU was a legitimate football school at the time because the Mangino years were my exposure to KU football. So yeah, I mean, for one thing, there's great on-field football history between these two programs. But the reason why it's such an excellent rivalry is because of the bitter hatred that dates back to Bleeding Kansas in the early days of the Civil War, and like his people from each state burning down portions of the other state. Like, not a lot of college football rivalries have that element to it, as visceral as they may be. Um, I think the historical component is what makes this one unique. I've only had the chance to experience it a couple times since I got here, and of course only in basketball. Most notably, going to Columbia last year for the KU Mizzou game in December, and man, it is intense. It is intense and it is unrelenting. And I think it will be no different this time around in Columbia for football. And if anything, it will be inflamed even more, simply because of the quantity of people there. I'm really excited for it. KU and K State. First of all, it hasn't been that much of a rivalry because K State has won a million times in a row in football. In basketball, it hasn't been much of a rivalry because KU has won a million times in a row. But even then, I think there's sort of a grudging mutual respect between the two. No such thing exists between KU and Mizzou. Um, it's interesting. It's a school with these two big rivals because the dynamics are so different. But in essence, I don't know necessarily if I'd say that people around Lawrence are excited for it. Um, but I mean, it's been so long since it happened. I'm glad they're giving it a go, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it unfolds over these next couple of years.
I do wish, there's so many in it with the SEC having so many core rivalries that are outside of the conference. Like we talked about earlier, Georgia and Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State, Clemson, and South Carolina. Why can we not get this one every year as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure. I think that sometimes teams are reluctant to put a significant power conference opponent on their non-conference schedule. But on the other hand, the way the college football playoff is now, maybe the performance within your conference matters most. It'll be really interesting to see if this persists beyond the current contract. Um, Certainly, like many of those SEC schools you mentioned have found ways to maintain those. There's no reason why this one can't go the same way.
And then the last question we've got written down here is FanDuel has the season win total at 7.5 this season. Which side are we putting the mortgage on, over or under?
To me, it feels like FanDuel has every Big 12 school at 7.5. Like, I don't know if you've seen, they're all kind of bunched up there. They don't want to put anyone higher or lower. No one knows the deal is in the Big 12 right now. I think that's a good over-under because I keep saying I think this is about a 7-win team. I lean towards the under just because I think it's really competitive. They have some extremely challenging. I mean, they got to go on the road to Iowa State again, and they've had success against them recent years, but that's always a tough place to play. We mentioned Missouri. They haven't beaten K-State in nearly 2 decades at this point. I find it hard to envision a team with this many new pieces and this much uncertainty being one of the top few teams in the Big 12. However, I do think that they will do significantly better than last year just because of the increased level of competition and the way they've heightened their athleticism at a lot of positions. So I do see them returning to a bowl game, but I lean slightly toward the under just because, I don't know, you look at the schedule, and if you factor in like 1 or 2 unexpected losses, it's hard to get to 9 wins or 8 wins in doing so. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty accurate number FanDuel has up there.
All right. Is there anything else you feel like fans outside of Kansas should know about the team this season?
I guess I should mention they're going to have a really good special teams unit, which has not really ever been the case at KU in recent memory. I mean, their kicker, Laith Martin, missed 1 field goal last year at South Alabama, and he was a Groza Award semifinalist. And their punter, who's an Australian, not only does he kick with both feet, which is very cool,
That is cool.
he was one of the best freshmen in all of FCS while a punter. So I figure I should mention that because KU's special teams has been kind of woeful at times. Not always, but they've had a couple of questionable special teams years. I feel this could be their best special teams yet. Other than that, it's just interesting to see. I think this team could maybe get on people's radars midway through the season. I feel like people don't know a lot because of all the new personnel, but I appreciate you giving me the chance to talk about them at this juncture because I feel like most of the public discussion has been Jalen Daniels and Devin Neal and will they make it back to a bowl game? So it's nice to go deep on certain areas.
No, for sure. And we love talking to different people from around the country and getting a perspective. And one of our favorite times of year because, well, last year people I picked Purdue last year to talk to. They were not excited even before the season, but everybody this year has been super excited, and we love that.
I'm so glad to hear that, as they should be. This is the season where everyone can afford to feel optimistic.
Yes, for sure. I've got a couple of housekeeping things to close up on if you want to go ahead and get out of here, but I appreciate you coming on and talking to me.
All right, cool. Thanks so much.
Have a good night. All right, y'all. I want to say thank you again to Henry. It was a pleasure talking to him. We've had a hit and miss experience with writers coming on, but that was awesome. Super informed, and he could articulate it well. So we really appreciate him coming on and talking to us. We are trying to get a couple more Puncher's Chance interviews down. I think we may be missing one or two. Um, if y'all know anybody for Louisville or Cincinnati, we'd love to hear from you because we Louisville and Cincinnati people have a lot of them have their messages closed. But rate and review the show 5 stars and follow us on social media at nothing.finer.pod on Instagram, at finerpod on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. Just look us up there. And always remember, there's nothing finer in the land than a drunk, obnoxious Georgia fan.